If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Ordinary Walker on Facebook asks, if Paul was truly a fraud, why the apostles accepted him into their community? Why didn't they doubt the testimony of Paul about the vision he had in Damascus? And is it reasonable to say Acts is just pure fiction about the story of Jesus and his followers, and it has no historical value?
Well, according to Acts, the early Christians who were introduced to Paul under the wing of Barnabas did fear him and didn't believe what he was saying. But then Barnabas vouched for him and said, look, I've heard him dialogue with the synagogue elders in Damascus and so forth. Really, he is one of us. And they said, okay. Now, whether that happened or not, who knows? But of course, it's an inevitable part of a story in which Paul was a converted persecutor. And many people think that the persecution was itself fictitious, that Paul didn't. And again, the more links you have in a chain, the more likely it is that some of them are weak links, but it does kind of appear that all the places in which Paul says that he persecuted Christians have a shadow of doubt over them textually, that they have a preponderance of vocabulary atypical in the Pauline epistles, and that they don't necessarily fit the context of the argument. J.C. O'Neill argued this in Romans and Galatians. He had books about both, and in other places too. And or in the pastoral epistles, which are completely fictitious. And I think, and this is partly based on something Loisy said, that it appears to me that you had Pauline and Petrine factions who didn't like each other much, trading slanders against the other guy's apostle, that the story of Peter kissing off Jesus with these denials and proving himself a spineless coward, that this was probably just cooked up by Paulinists. And look at this guy, come on, you're going to have him as your teacher? And then on the other hand, that Petrine members said that Paul was a persecutor of the church, which was perhaps a sincere misunderstanding of the correct claim that as a Christian apostle who taught you don't have to keep the Torah, that was, they perceived that as Paul fighting against the gospel and its adherents. In fact, in 2 Corinthians, Paul uses military language. We campaign not with worldly weapons, but with weapons of the Spirit in the right hand and the left, and so on. So they may have taken that to mean he inflicted literal violence on believers and on Christians, period, which the Petrine Christians simply equated with being a law-observant Christian, Jewish Christian. And so by oversimplification and just plain slander, you had these nasty stories about each of the figureheads circulated by the fans of the other. So the whole business in Acts with Paul being the coat check boy for the mob that was putting Stephen to death, that issue's in the persecution of the Hellenist Christians, and Paul has authorization to go to far-flung cities like Damascus, where the Palestinian or the Jerusalem Sanhedrin had no authorization. They couldn't have given him papers anybody would have respected to drag out and put the thumb screws to heretics and so forth. So a lot of people think that that's fiction, and I've tried to show that, and I find I'm not the only one. One of the Tübingen scholars said the same thing. I forget which one. That the story of Paul and the road to Damascus, this is based on the story of the miraculous sort of hypnotic conversion of King Pentheus in Euripides' The Bacchae, and also the conversion of Heliodorus, the agent of the Seleucid king, in 2nd Maccabees 3. And it's just so close to both of them, and no such scene is ever mentioned in any of the so-called Pauline epistles. So there is real reason to believe that a whole lot of that stuff is fiction. Or the order of widows with which Stephen's ordination is connected. This seems to be misplaced. They already had in place a distribution system for the widows of a particular ethnic group there. That seems awfully early for that. The communitarianism they ascribe to the Jerusalem church, that kind of seems like one of the descriptions of an imagined golden communitarian age that preceded the one we live in now, kind of like communism says. It's a very ancient idea. And so that it's this ideal thing. And one of the stories that underlies that is that of Ananias and Sapphira, which is patently fiction. So it doesn't look very good. The story of Ananias and Sapphira, bracketed with that of Barnabas, that's also based on the stories of Achan in Joshua 6, I think it is, and that of what's his name, King Ahab and Queen Jezebel cheating Naboth out of his vineyard and so on. I mean, Thomas L. Brody shows that. So it just seems like you're not dealing with any historical sources here.
What about Barnabas? This is interesting because we see him traveling with Paul supposedly, and he's a partner with Paul. You said he, according to the narrative, it seems like he's going to these other apostles saying, "Listen, I vouch for this guy. I've seen him. He's good. Trust me. Take my word for it." Initiating him, so to speak, into the gang and letting him in. But Paul, doesn't he claim elsewhere Barnabas left him? So why? What is going on here? Is that just, Derek, don't overthink it. You're overthinking things. Don't create something that's not there, as Christians would probably play. James and Paul and Peter, they were all brothers. They just argued. No. Why would Barnabas leave him? Was it because of the circumcision scenario with Peter? What do you think, speculation here, of course, all of this is, do you think that there's any reality to what do you do with Barnabas leaving him but was once there with him, and now he has Silas in Acts? So it's no longer Barnabas who's traveling with him. In Acts 17, he has Silas, and he calls for Silas rather than Barnabas. Where did Barnabas go? What's happening?
Well, there seem to be two versions of the split. One in Galatians, where he publicly calls out Barnabas as a hypocrite and a Judaizer. So it's no surprise that'd be the end of that little partnership, though it doesn't say so, but the fact that it doesn't kind of implies things fell apart. But in Acts it says that they separated because Barnabas wanted to take Mark, who was his cousin, along with him again for another missionary journey, when he wimped out on the previous one and went back home. And Barnabas said, he's just a kid, give him a break. And Paul says, no, you put your hand to the plow and look back, you're not worthy. Of course, that's a favorite Lucan quote from some classical source, I forget which one, but that implies that Luke is trying to paper over things. Whether the Galatians business was factual or not, who knows? But this sounds like somebody who knew of it wanted to present it in a different light. Well, it's just a kind of a difficulty, personal difficulties. Now, I think that Barnabas, based on what Brody says, is a completely fictional character, because what is the first thing we hear that he does? He sells a field and contributes the money to the common fund. And then right on the heels of that, inspired by it, Ananias and Sapphira decide, well, he's getting a lot of acclaim for that. What say we give a decent donation? We'll keep back some of it to live on, but we'll say we gave the whole thing. And they get killed for it, voodoo style by Peter. Now, that is obviously a fiction. And as Lavoisier said, it's a priestcraft story, a cautionary tale. Don't you do this. But the thing is, the whole thing appears to be based, as I just mentioned, according to Brody, on the story of Naboth's vineyard. And because the shifty couple, they turn out to be, the prototypes are Ahab and Jezebel. And given that it's rooted in that story, I kind of think Barnabas does not mean son of encouragement, but rather second Naboth, Barnabas, the son of Naboth. And so it's just a fictional character. He's what Svetan Todorov says, what he calls a narrative man. He's simply named for the function he has in the story because he had no existence prior to the story. And so I think the whole thing is screwed up. There's also a Barsabbas in Acts, son of the Sabbath, whatever that means. And so who knows what the origin was, but it seems to me he's a fictitious character. There's an epistle ascribed to Barnabas, which nobody thinks is authentic, though it's not impossible if there was a Barnabas. But as Islamic tradition claims that Barnabas was one of the 12 disciples. That's interesting. So his fictional resume grows and grows. And once when I was a pastor of an unconventional Baptist church, we had a guest speaker on Trinity Sunday, and it was this guy who was a friend of mine who was the imam of the local mosque. And I knew I'd shock this guy by having one of the scripture readings being from the Gospel of Barnabas, which Muslims think is authentic. And so he had to stop and say he was surprised to hear that. And anyway, sorry. So I think Barnabas is really a fictive character. You mentioned Silas, who was the replacement for Paul's buddy Barnabas. I have this theory that I've never heard, though perhaps some other lunatic has suggested it, where I suggest that for some reason Silas is a kind of masking name for James the Just, the head of the Jerusalem church. And notice that, well, for one thing, I guess this is what started me thinking this way. As Robert Eisenman points out in James, the brother of Jesus, some of the names of the pre-Islamic prophets in the Quran would make sense if they had survived from biblical stories and the like. but in the sounds slightly different because of the Arabic, sister language to Aramaic and Hebrew, and the word for the just or the righteous is saleh, and which I guess in English is Saleh, and in the same way that he figures that Ad, A-D, he says that the Quran speaks of the people of Ad, and that reflects Adai or Thaddeus, a major Syrian apostle, and that Hud, who was, the story is told about him as a pre-Islamic prophet. Hud is Yehuda or Jude, and I find this pretty fascinating. And I was asked the question, do these striking little things mean something or do they mean nothing? I can't prove what they mean, but if you can point out a pattern, as Eisenman does, I start thinking, well, that's worth exploring. And so though Eisenman does not say this, and I don't want you to think he does, because he may think it's insane and I don't want to, tar him with this, but a guy named Salah could well be the same as one who is James the Just. And and Silas, though that's a well-attested Greek name, it could be one of these many ones where a Semitic name is sort of translated kind of unofficially into a similar sounding Greek name, like Yehoshua becomes Jesus, or Jason even. Jews named Simeon often took the name for business purposes of Simon, a Greek name, stuff like that. Well, here's what I'm thinking. I noticed an oddity that Barnabas goes to Jerusalem with Paul, and they hammer out the conciliar statement of the rules that Gentile Christians need to follow, just a few basic ones, and not the whole Torah. And that Paul is commissioned to go around to all his churches promulgating this thing, saying, okay, everybody gather around, here's what the head honchos in Jerusalem say from now on we got to do. And who accompanies him? Silas, of whom we have not yet heard in the book of Acts. And he goes along with Paul, backing him up in some unspecified way. And he is with him, like in Philippi in Acts 16. He's imprisoned with Paul and so on. And he's traveling with him until we get, I think in chapter 20 or 21, Paul and his entourage get back to Jerusalem, at which time Silas drops out of the narrative, but who comes back in? James the Just. And he's saying, oh, Paul, you see how many Jews have believed, and all of them zealots for the law. But, of course, we ruled that the Gentiles don't have to do that, etc. No more from Silas. What happened here? Well, I began to wonder, why is this guy accompanying Paul at all? And why for this, in this circumstance? Is it possible it meant to say that James, who had decreed this thing, went with Paul to make sure he got it right? And then once that was over, he was, they don't need him anymore. And it's not so much that he hadn't seen James for a while since the council, but that they simply start calling him James again. I don't know why. So there's a big gaping hole in the theory. But it just seems like one of those things where you gotta wonder what is going on here. It's like as soon as James is out of the scene, off the stage, Silas replaces him and does what looks like a kind of an extension of James's job. And then when that's done, where'd Silas go? Oh, James, how you doing? So that's my nutty theory, that Silas was supposed to be James the Just. Again, go ahead and attack it. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. But that's my weird suspicion about Silas.
Let me add something for complete speculation that we're in here. This is interesting. Acts 17, Paul journeys with, and I can't remember exactly where he goes, but this is with Silas during this phase of what you're talking about here. And he first, as it says, as it was custom, went to the synagogue. Kind of weird, Paul going to the synagogue in this Acts narrative. Going to the synagogue to disperse with the Jews, and then it mentions, and the noble Greeks, or it might say the noble Greek women, and the men, whatever. And he is over here talking with the Jews, and then goes to the city place, or whatever, right there, and a mob comes, and they literally make them run. All of them. So then they go to the next city. Same thing happens. Silas is with him. Another mob comes. The last time, and it does it the third time, interesting things happen in threes all the time in this book. The last time he goes to Athens at the Areopagus. Areopagus, but I don't know if he goes to a synagogue. I can't recall if he went to a synagogue.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. And notice that he doesn't have Silas with him. He calls for Silas to come, but in the meantime, it says his spirit was stirred up. And then he went to the to the marketplace, I think it was, and the Areopagus where
they bring him to the Areopagus. Hey, we got a place we discuss this stuff. Why don't you come
on over from the marketplace that he's at? And he says, this is where we always had new ideas being talked about. Acts 17 says this. Mm-hmm. He sent for Silas, but Silas wasn't with him. Why didn't Silas go with him when he went? It's weird to me that it's almost like he got a chance to be alone. Weird how the narrative plays it out. He got a chance to be alone to share this message with Stoic philosophers, with people that it would seem, and I might be overstretching here, James wouldn't associate with.
James might have with the Stoics, because Josephus said that the Pharisees were essentially Jewish Stoics. But Epicureans, they used to vilify the Sadducees as being Epicureans because they didn't believe in an actively intervening God.
Would you find him at the Areopagus?
Would you find
James?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, that might not have been his turf. That would make sense. I
just found it weird. I mean, look, this is complete speculation, but I wonder if the narrative is presented by someone who's saying, look, we can't have him saying James is following him, like you said, but then go further in the details of the time that Silas is the James narrative, let's just say. He doesn't follow him to this strange place to present a message to people, that have no clue about this God. He's running around looking at their religious statues, the names of gods, to the unknown God. Silas wasn't there. What's going on? I don't know. Maybe
Paul is perceived as being too Hellenistic because he quotes Epimenides, who was a legendary Superman a miracle worker among Greeks, and also either, I think, Arian or Cleomenes, both of whom happen to have the "we are all his children" thing, and then let's see. I came upon an altar dedicated to the unknown God. Well, this God that you know of, I will introduce you to. He's the Hebrew God and so on. Well, that was part of an Epimenides story where he was called on as a kind of superhero to stop a plague in Athens, and he did. And he said, well, I can tell you why this is happening. It's there's a god or gods you have ignored, and they're trying to get some attention now. And so he had him build an altar to unknown gods, just to take care of them. And so that appears to be the basis of this, only Luke makes it singular, an unknown God, because he's bringing in the Hebrew God. And then on top of that, One of the few who get converted is Dionysius, the Areopagite. So he must have been one of the people in charge. But Dionysius, okay, it doesn't prove anything, but he is named for Dionysus. And that's interesting. And this is where Paul gets catcalled off the stage, because like Socrates, and that's probably part of the fiction, he is accused of promoting strange deities or new gods, because they said he preaches Jesus and Anastasis, the resurrection. And in my dissertation, The Widow, Traditions in Luke Acts, I go into this, that's a tip-off to the reader that there were Christians who believed that Jesus was the dying God resurrected by his divine consort, resurrection, the Anastasis, just as Baal was brought back to life by Anat, and
Osiris by
Isis, Adonis by Aphrodite, and so on and so on. And that's, I mean, again, call me Barbara Walker, call me Hugh Schoenfield, I can't laugh those people off, because there's this dominant scholarly axiom almost, where there's smoke, there's no fire. When they say that, boy, this is kind of suggestive, but since we can't actually prove it, we're free to pretend it just doesn't exist, it means nothing. No, where, if you want it more biblical, where the body is, there the vultures will be circling. It's got to mean something, or at least it might. I mean, I'm not making any definitive claims.
Yeah, great point.